Section 2 of The Sorrows of Young Werther. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. The Sorrows of Young Werther by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, as read by Rob DeLorenzo in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Section 2. June 16. Why do I not write to you? You lay claim to learning, and ask such a question. You should have guessed that I am well. That is to say, in a word, I have made an acquaintance who has won my heart. I know not. To give you a regular account of the manner in which I have become acquainted with the most amiable women would be a difficult task. I am a happy and contented mortal, but a poor historian. An angel! Nonsense! Everybody so describes his mistress, and yet I find it impossible to tell you how perfect she is, or why she is so perfect. Suffice it to say, she has captivated all of my senses. So much simplicity with so much understanding, so mild, and yet so resolute, a mind so placid, and a life so active. But all this is ugly balderdash, which expresses not a single character or feature. Some other time, but no, not some other time, now, this very instant, I will tell you all about it. Now or never. Well, between ourselves, since I commenced my letter, I have been 3 times on the point of throwing down my pen, of ordering my horse, and of riding out, and yet I have vowed this morning that I would not ride today, and yet every moment I am rushing to the window to see how high the sun is. I could not restrain myself. Go to her I must. I have just returned, Wilhelm, and whilst I am taking supper, I will write to you. What a delight it was for my soul to see her in the midst of her dear, beautiful children. 8 brothers and sisters. But, if I proceed thus, you will be no wiser at the end of my letter than you were at the beginning. Attend, then. I will compel myself to give you the details. I mentioned to you the other day that I have become acquainted with S., the district judge, and that he invited me to go and visit him in his retirement, or rather in his little kingdom. But I neglected going, and perhaps should have never gone, if chance had not discovered to me the treasure which lay concealed in that retired spot. Some of our young people have proposed giving a ball in the country, at which I consented to be present. I offered my hand for the evening to a pretty and agreeable, but rather commonplace sort of girl from the immediate neighbourhood, and it was agreed that I should engage a carriage, and call upon Charlotte, with my partner and her aunt, to convey them to the ball. My companion informed me, as we drove along through the park to the hunting lodge, that should I make the acquaintance of a very charming young lady, "Take care," the aunt said, "that you do not lose your heart." "Why?" said I. "Because she is already engaged to a very worthy man," she replied, "who is gone to settle his affairs upon the death of his father, and will succeed to a very considerable inheritance." This information possessed no interest for me. When we arrived at the gate, the sun was setting behind the tops of the mountains. The atmosphere was heavy, and the ladies expressed their fears of an approaching storm, as masses of low black clouds were gathering on the horizon. I relieved their anxieties by pretending to be weatherwise, although I myself had some apprehensions lest our pleasure should be interrupted. I alighted, and the maid came to the door, and requested us to wait a moment for her mistress. I walked across the court to a well-built house, and, ascending the flight of steps in the front, opened the door, and saw before me the most charming spectacle I have ever witnessed. 6 children, from 11 to 2 years old, were running about the hall, and surrounding a young lady of middle height, with a lovely figure, dressed in a robe of simple white, trimmed with pink ribbons. She was holding a rye loaf in her hand, and was cutting slices for the little ones around her, in proportion to their age and appetite. She performed her task in a graceful and affectionate manner. Each claimant awaited for his turn with outstretched hands, and boisterously shouted his thanks. Some of them ran away at once to enjoy their evening meal, whilst others, of a gentler disposition, retired to the courtyard to see the strangers, and to survey the carriage in which Charlotte was to drive away. Pray forgive me for giving you the trouble to come for me, and for keeping the ladies waiting. But dressing and arranging some household duties before I leave had made me forget my children's supper, and they do not like to take it from any one but me. I uttered some indifferent compliment. By the whole, my soul was absorbed by her air, her voice, her manner, and I had scarcely recovered myself when she ran into the room to fetch her gloves and fan. The young ones threw an inquiring glance at me from a distance, whilst I approached the youngest, a most delicious little creature. He drew back, and Charlotte, entering at that very moment, said, "Louis, shake hands with your cousin." The little fellow obeyed willingly, and I could not resist giving him a hearty kiss, notwithstanding his rather dirty face. "Cousin," said I to Charlotte, as I handed her down, "do you think I deserve the happiness of being related to you?" She replied, with a ready smile, "Oh, I have such a number of cousins, that I should be sorry if you were the most undeserving of them." In taking leave, she desired her next sister, Sophie, a girl of about 11 years old, to take great care of the children, and to say good bye to papa for her when he came home from his ride. She enjoined the little ones to obey their sister Sophie as they would herself, upon which some promised that they would, but a little fair-haired girl, of about 6 years old, looked discontented and said, "But Sophie is not you, Charlotte, and we like you best." The two eldest boys had clambered up to the carriage, and at my request she permitted them to accompany us a little way through the forest, upon their promising to sit very still and hold fast. We were hardly seated, and the ladies had scarcely exchanged compliments, making the usual remarks upon each other's dress, and upon the company they expected to meet, when Charlotte stopped in the carriage, and made her brothers get down. They insisted upon kissing her hands once more, which the eldest did with all the tenderness of a youth of 15, but the other in a lighter and more careless manner. She desired them again to give her love to the children, and we drove off. The aunt inquired of Charlotte whether she had finished the book that she had last sent. "No," said Charlotte, "I did not like it. You can have it again. And the one before that was not much better." I was surprised, upon asking the title, to hear that it was. We feel obliged to suppress the passage in the letter to prevent any one from feeling aggravated, although no author need pay much attention to the opinion of a mere girl, or that of an unsteady young man. I found penetration and character in everything she said. Every expression seemed to brighten her features with new charms, with new rays of genius, which unfolded by degrees as she felt herself understood. "When I was younger," she said, "I loved nothing so much as romances. Nothing could equal my delight when, on some holiday, I could settle down quietly in a corner, and enter my whole heart and soul into the joys or sorrows of some fictitious Lenora. I do not deny that they possess some charms for me yet, but I read so seldom that I prefer books suited exactly to my taste, and I like those authors best whose scenes describe my own situation in life, and the friends who are about me, whose stories touch me with interest, from resembling my own homely existence, which, without being absolutely paradise, is, on the whole, a source of indescribable happiness." I endeavoured to conceal the emotions which these words occasioned, but it was of slight avail; for, when she had expressed so truly her opinion of the Vicar of Wakefield, and of other works, the names of which I omit, though the names were omitted, yet the authors mentioned deserve Charlotte's approbation, and will feel it in their hearts when they read this passage. It concerns no other person. I could no longer contain myself, but gave full utterance to what I thought of it, and it was not until Charlotte had addressed herself to the two other ladies that I remembered their presence, and observed them sitting mute with astonishment. The aunt looked at me several times with an air of raillery, which, of course, I did not mind at all. We talked of the pleasures of dancing. "If it is a fault to love it," said Charlotte, "I am ready to confess that I prize it above all other amusements. If anything disturbs me, I go to the piano, play an air to which I have danced, and all goes right again directly." You, who know me, can fancy how steadfastly I gazed upon her rich dark eyes during these remarks, how my very soul gloated over her warm lips and fresh glowing cheeks, how I became quite lost in the delightful meaning of her words, so much so that I scarcely heard the actual expressions. In short, I alighted from the carriage like a person in a dream, and was so lost in the dim world around me that I scarcely heard the music which resonated from the illuminated ballroom. The two Messieurs Adrian and a certain N. I cannot trouble myself with the names, who were the aunt's and Charlotte's partners, received us at the carriage door, and took possession of their ladies, whilst I followed with mine. We commenced with a minuet. I led out one lady after another, and precisely those who were of the most disagreeable could not bring themselves to leave off. Charlotte and her partner began an English country dance, and you must imagine my delight when it was their turn to dance the figure with us. You should see Charlotte dance. She dances with her whole heart and soul. Her figure is all harmony, elegance, and grace, as if she were conscious of nothing else, and had no other thought or feeling, and, doubtless, for the moment, every other sensation is extinct. She was engaged for the second country dance, but promised me the third, and assured me, with the most agreeable freedom, that she was very fond of waltzing. "It is a custom here," she said, "for the previous partners to waltz together, but my partner is an indifferent waltzer, and I will feel delighted if I save him the trouble. Your partner is not allowed to waltz, and, indeed, is equally incapable, but I observed during the country dance that you waltz well. So, if you will waltz with me, I beg you would propose it to my partner, and I will propose it to yours." We agreed, and it was arranged that our partners should mutually entertain each other. We set off, and, at first, delighted ourselves with the usual graceful motions of the arms. With what grace, with what ease she moved! When the waltz commenced, and the dancers whirled around each other in a giddy maze, there was some confusion owing to the incapacity of some of the dancers. We judiciously remained still, allowing the others to weary themselves, and, when the awkward dancers had withdrawn, we joined in, and kept it up famously together with one other couple, Adrian and his partner. Never did I dance more lightly. I felt myself more than a mortal, holding this loveliest of creatures in my arms, flying with her as rapidly as the wind, till I lost sight of every other object, and, oh Wilhelm, I vow at that moment that that maiden whom I loved, or for whom I felt the slightest attachment, never, never should waltz with anyone else but me, if I had to perdition for it. You will understand this. We took a few turns in the room to recover our breath. Charlotte sat down, and felt refreshed by partaking of some oranges which I had secured, the only ones that had been left; but at every slice which, from politeness, she offered to her neighbours, I felt as though a dagger went through my heart. We were the second couple in the third country dance. As we were going down, and heaven knows what ecstasy I gazed at her arms and eyes, beaming with the sweetest feeling of pure and genuine enjoyment. We passed a lady whom I had noticed for her charming expression of countenance, although she was no longer young. She looked at Charlotte with a smile, then, holding up her finger in a threatening attitude, repeated twice in a very significant tone the voice of the name Albert. "Who is Albert?" I said to Charlotte, "if it is not impertinent to ask?" She was about to answer when we were obliged to separate in order to execute a figure in the dance, and, as we crossed over again in front of the other, I perceived she looked somewhat pensive. "Why need I conceal it from you?" she said, as she gave me her hand for the promenade. "Albert is a worthy man to whom I am engaged." Now there was nothing new to me in this, for the girls had told me of it on the way, but it was so far new that I had not thought of it in connection with her whom, in so short a time, I had learned to prize so highly. Enough! I became confused, got out in the figure, and occasioned general confusion, so that it required all Charlotte's presence of mind to set me right by pulling and pushing me into my proper place. The dance was not yet finished when the lightning which had for some time been seen in the horizon, and which I had asserted to proceed entirely from heat, grew more violent, and the thunder was heard above the music. When any distress or terror surprises us in the midst of our amusements, it naturally makes a deeper impression than at other times, either because the contrast makes us more keenly susceptible, or rather because our senses are more open to the impressions, and the shock is consequently stronger. To this cause I must ascribe the fright and the shrieks of the ladies. One sat down in a corner with her back to the window, and held her fingers to her ears. A second knelt down before her, and hid her face in her lap. A third threw herself between them, and embraced her sister with 1,000 tears. Some insisted on going home. Others, unconscious of their actions, wanted sufficient presence of mind to repress the impertinence of the young partners, who sought to direct themselves to those sighs which the lips of our agitated beauties intended for heaven. Some of the gentlemen had gone downstairs to smoke a quiet cigar, and the rest of the company gladly embraced the happy suggestion of the hostess to retire to another room which was provided with shutters and curtains. We had hardly got there when Charlotte placed the chairs in a circle, and, when the company had sat down in compliance with her request, she forthwith proposed a round game. I noticed some of the company prepare their mouths and draw themselves up at the prospect of some agreeable forfeit. "Let us play at counting," she said. "Now pay attention. I shall go round the circle from right to left, and each person is to count, one after the other, the number that comes to him, and must count fast. Whoever stops or mistakes is to have a box on the ear, and so on until we have counted 1,000. It was so delightful to see the fun. She went round the circle with an upraised arm. 1, said the first; 2, said the second; 3, said the third; and so on, till Charlotte went faster and faster. One made a mistake. Instantly a box on the ear, and, amid the laughter that ensued, came another box, and so on, faster and faster. I myself came in for 2. I fancied that they were harder than the rest, and felt quite delighted. A general laughter and confusion put an end to the game long before we had counted as far as 1,000. The party broke up into little separate knots. The storm had ceased, and I followed Charlotte into the ballroom. On the way she said, "The game banished their fears of the storm." I could make no reply. "I myself," she continued, "was as much frightened as any of them, but by affecting courage to keep up the spirits of others, I forgot my own apprehensions." We went to the window. It was still thundering at a distance. A soft rain pouring down over the country, and filled the air around us with delicious odours. Charlotte leaned forward on her arm, her eyes wandering over the scene. She raised them to the sky, and then turned them upon me. They were moistened with tears. She placed her hand on mine, and said, "Klopstock!" At once I remembered the magnificent ode which was in her thoughts. I felt oppressed with the weight of my sensations, and sank under them. It was more than I could bear. I bent over her hand, kissed it in a stream of delicious tears, and again looked up to her eyes. Divine Klopstock! Why didst thou not see thy hypothesis in those eyes? And thy name so often profaned, would that I never heard it repeated. June 19. I no longer remember where I stopped in my narrative. I only know that it was 2 in the morning when I went to bed, and if you had been with me, that I might have talked instead of writing to you, I should, in all probability, have kept you up until daylight. I think I have not yet related what happened as we rode home from the ball, nor have I the time to tell you now. It was a most magnificent sunrise. The whole country was refreshed, and the raindrops fell drop by drop from the trees in the forest. Our companions were asleep. Charlotte asked me if I did not wish to sleep also, and begged of me not to make any ceremony on her account. Looking steadfastly at her, I answered, "As long as I see those eyes open, there is no fear of my falling asleep." We both continued awake until we reached her door. The maid opened it softly, and assured her, in answer to her inquiries, that her father and the children were well and still sleeping. I left her, asking permission to visit her in the course of the day. She consented, and I went, and, since that time, sun, moon, and stars may pursue their course. I know not whether it is by night or by day. The whole world is nothing to me. June 21st. My days are as happy as those reserved by God for his elect, and whatever be my fate hereafter, I can never say that I have not tasted joy, the purest joy of life. You know Walheim. I am now completely settled there. In that spot I am only half a league from Charlotte, and there I enjoy myself, and taste all the pleasure which can fall on the lot of man. Little did I imagine, when I selected Walheim for my pedestrian excursions, that all heaven lay so near it. How often in my wanderings from the hillside or from the meadows across the river have I beheld this hunting lodge, which now contains within it all the joys of my heart! I have often, my dear Wilhelm, reflected on the eagerness men feel to wander and to make new discoveries, and upon that secret impulse which afterward inclines them to return to their narrow circle, conform to the laws of custom, and embarrass themselves no longer with what passes around them. It is so strange how, when I first came here, and gazed upon that lovely valley from the hillside, I felt charmed with the entire scene surrounding me. The little wood opposite, how delightful to sit under its shade! How fine the view from that point of rock! Then that delightful chain of hills, and the exquisite valley at their feet! Could I but wander and lose myself among them! I went, and returned without finding what I wished. Distance, my friend, is like futurity. A dim vastness is spread before our souls. The perceptions of our mind are so obscure as those of our vision, and we desire earnestly to surrender upon our whole being, that it may be filled with the complete and perfect bliss of one glorious emotion. But alas! when we have attained our object, when the distance there becomes the present here, all is changed. We are as poor and circumscribed as ever, and our souls still languish for unattainable happiness. So does the restless traveller pant for his native soil, and find in his own cottage, in the arms of his wife, in the affections of his children, and in the labour necessary for their support, that happiness which he has sought in vain through the whole wide world. When, in the morning at sunrise, I go out to Walheim, and with my own hands gather in the garden the peas which are to serve for my dinner, when I sit down to shell them, and read my Homer during the intervals, and then, selecting a saucepan from the kitchen, fetch my own butter, put my mess on the fire, cover it up, and sit down and stir it as occasion requires, I figure to myself the illustrious suitors of Penelope killing, dressing, and preparing their own oxen and swine. Nothing fills me with a more pure and genuine sense of happiness than those traits of patriarchal life, which, thank heaven, I can imitate without affectation. Happy it, indeed, for me my heart is capable of feeling the same simple and innocent pleasure as the peasant whose table is covered with food of his own rearing, and who not only enjoys his meal, but remembers with delight the happy days and sunny mornings when he planted it, the soft evenings he watered it, and the pleasure he experienced in watching its daily growth. June 29. The day before yesterday, the physician came in from town to pay a visit to the judge. He found me on the floor playing with Charlotte's children. Some of them were scrambling over me, and others romping with me, and, as I caught and tickled them, they made a great noise. The doctor is a formal sort of personage. He adjusts the plaits of his ruffles, and continually settles his frill whilst he is talking to you, and he thought my conduct beneath the dignity of a sensible man. I could perceive this by his countenance, but I did not suffer myself to be disturbed. I allowed him to continue his wise conversation, whilst I rebuilt the children's card house for them as fast as they threw them down. He went about the town afterwards, complaining that the judge's children were spoiled enough before, but now Werther was completely ruining them. Yes, my dear Wilhelm, nothing on this earth affects my heart so much as children. When I look on at their doings, when I mark in the little creatures the seeds of all those virtues and qualities which they will one day find so indispensable, when I behold in the obstinate all the future firmness and constancy of a noble character, in the capricious that levity and gaiety of temper which will carry them lightly over the dangers and troubles of life, their whole nature simple and unpolluted. Then I call to mind the golden words of the great teacher of mankind, "Unless ye become like one of these." And now, my friend, these children who are our equals, whom we ought to consider as our models, we treat them as though they are our subjects. They are allowed no will of their own, and we, then, none ourselves. Whence comes our exclusive right? Is it because we are older and more experienced? Great God! From the height of thy heaven thou beholdest great children and little children, and no others, and thy Son has long since declared which afford thee greatest pleasure. But they believe in him, and hear him not. That, too, is an old story, and they train their children after their own image, etc. Adieu, Wilhelm. I will not further bewilder myself with this subject. End of section 2 of the Sorrows of young Werther.